How should students answer explain questions for GCSE Science for AQA? I'm going to go through a couple of examples of how to answer 3-mark explain questions for GCSE Chemistry for AQA Combined Science and also for Separate Science, Unit 6, Rates of Chemical Reactions. First of all, let's have a look at the specification. Within the specification, it talks about collision theory and activation energy. It gives us some information on what the students should be able to do within their exam, and it also gives us some information about collision theory and the 4 factors that affect the rate of chemical reactions. The specification states that students should be able to predict and explain using collision theory the effect of changing conditions such as concentration, pressure, surface area, and temperature. From the information that's given to us within the specification, we can see that there are 4 factors that affect the rate of reaction: surface area to volume ratio in a solid, concentration of reactants in a solution, pressure of reacting gases, and the temperature. For all 4 factors, when they increase, it causes an increase in the rate of the reaction. And this is due to the same reason: the frequency of collisions increases. It's important to remember that these questions are asking us to comment on how these different factors affect the rate of the chemical reaction. Rate is determined by the amount of something that is produced or used up within a certain time period. That's why when you answer in terms of collisions, you need to mention that it's the frequency of the collisions that increases. Frequency is, again, looking at number within a certain amount of time. If students just said that the number of collisions increased, this may lose them the mark. When asked to explain how one of these factors affects the rate of the chemical reaction, usually you will receive 1 mark for stating how it affects the rate of the reaction. So by stating that if there's an increase in one of these factors, it will increase the rate of the reaction. The 2nd mark is usually given for stating that this is because the frequency of the collisions increases. So that's 2 marks. These questions are usually worth 3 marks altogether, and the 3rd mark is slightly different for each of the different factors. So let's have a look at those now. If we're looking at concentration, you can see from the diagrams that in the lower concentration, there are less particles in the same volume of solution. In the 2nd diagram, where we've increased the concentration, it's at a higher concentration, there are many more particles within the same volume. Therefore, they're more likely to collide with each other, so the frequency of collisions increases, and this is what increases the rate of the chemical reaction. So the first 2 marks come from stating that the increase in the concentration of the reactant is going to increase the rate of the reaction, 1 mark, due to the frequency of collisions increasing. The 3rd mark is from stating that this is because there are more particles within the same volume, and that's the 3rd mark. Now let's look at surface area. To increase the surface area of a solid reactant, we have to break it up into smaller parts. You can see this in the diagram on the left, where all of the particles in green are all shown in a big lump together. In the 2nd diagram on the right, we can see that that big lump has now been broken up and there's just smaller groups of particles. It's the same number of particles, but because they've been broken apart, more of the particles are exposed to react with the other reactant. Just like for concentration, and it will be the same for the other factors too, the first 2 marks come from stating the exact same sentences. An increase in the surface area to volume ratio of a solid reactant will cause an increase in the rate of reaction. This is due to an increase in the frequency of collisions. For the 3rd and final mark, we just have to explain that this is because there are more particles now exposed on the surface of the solid which are available for collisions. An increase in the pressure of a gas as a reactant will also cause an increase in the rate of the reaction. In the diagrams, you can see that the space that the particles are arranged in has become smaller. This is similar to having a number of people walking down a street and having a wide pavement that they're walking down. Because the pavement is wide, they may or may not bump into each other, and therefore there may not be collisions. If we then made the same number of people walk down a narrow alleyway, it's very likely that they're going to bump into each other because there's now less room available when they're walking. So the first part of our answer, the first 2 marks, exactly the same again. We're going to say that an increase in pressure of a gas as a reactant is going to lead to an increase in the rate of reaction due to an increased frequency of collisions. The third and final mark comes from stating that the particles have less space to move around in. Finally, let's look at how temperature affects the rate of reaction. Once again, the first 2 sentences are exactly the same. The final sentence comes from explaining what's happening when the temperature is increased. The increase in temperature provides more kinetic energy to the particles, which is hard to show in the diagram. What we can see is that not only are the particles moving around more because they have more kinetic energy, therefore they're more likely to collide with each other and more frequency of collisions, but also that they have more energetic collisions when they do collide. So for that third mark, it's because the particles will have more kinetic energy and move faster, and their collisions will be more energetic. Now that we've looked at the different reasons for why the frequency of collision and therefore the rate of reaction increases for the 4 different factors, let's have a look at an example of an exam question. Explain, in terms of particles and collisions, what the effect of increasing the concentration of the reactants has on the rate of the reaction. 3 marks. Okay, you may want to pause the video and just have a quick go at writing out the answer yourself. Remember that the first 2 sentences are always the same for any of the factors when we talk about increasing the factor. And that is only the third and final sentence to get that last mark that's going to differ for each of the different 4 factors. Okay, so hopefully you was able to state that this would increase the rate of the reaction, and that this was because the frequency of collisions would also increase. If you've got that, that's 2 marks that you've bagged. Did you get that third and final mark in regards to increasing the concentration? So you should have said that the frequency of collisions increases because there are more particles within the same volume. If you got all 3 marks, then well done. Let's have a look at another. Increasing the temperature of the reaction increases the rate of the reaction. Use your knowledge of particles to explain why. 3 marks. Pause the video and have a quick go. Can you remember those first 2 sentences that don't change no matter which factor you look at? Can you remember that third and final one that's specific to temperature increasing? And how did you get on? Did you manage to get all 3 marks? If you did, then well done. I hope that you found this video helpful on how to achieve all 3 marks on the explain questions for rates of reaction. I'm Sarah, Science Curriculum Lead at Propello.